Freak.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or GBNews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs Co. So then, did you see last night's leadership debate? Who do you reckon won? There is so much to unpick. The ECHR, migration caps, reparations and a whole lot more. Also, Christopher Chubb, he's in hot water after many say that he's basically suggested that women with young children shouldn't be in such high-powered jobs such as leader of the opposition. What do you make to that? Also, a simple question for you. Why on earth do you think that there are so many migrants coming into this country without having criminal record checks? We all surely don't think that's okay, but what on earth is going on? Also, young drivers, when they first pass their test, do you think they should be able to carry passengers or not? And the Labour Party, surely they have better things to do here than spend their time heading over to the US to campaign for the elections over there for the Democrats, of course. Your thoughts? All of that and lots more, and a fabulous panel to keep you company. Look at this, everybody. I've got Matt Goodwin, the Polestar academic, and Judita De Silva, the broadcast journalist as well. But first, let's get stuck into the 6 o'clock news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines. It's just gone 6 o'clock. The Prime Minister is in Germany today holding talks with Quad leaders. Sir Keir Starmer travelled to Berlin to meet with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, US President Joe Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron. They discussed developments in the Middle East and also the war in Ukraine. Starmer also spoke about domestic issues during the press conference. He told journalists Labour will keep their manifesto pledges in the upcoming budget.
In relation to our manifesto, we are going to keep our manifesto pledges as we go into that election. I've made that very clear. I'm not going to preempt the individual measures that will be outlined by the Chancellor in due course, but I make fully clear this is going to be a budget that will fix the foundations and rebuild our country. No Prime Minister or Chancellor ever preempts the measures that may or may not be in a budget. I'm afraid you'll just have to wait until the Chancellor lays that out in full. But the structure, if you like, the framework, is going to be to fix the foundations and to rebuild our country. Thank you very much.
Some breaking news now. Music mogul Simon Cowell has said he is heartbroken and feels empty in a statement posted on Instagram following the death of former One Direction member Liam Payne. Payne died aged 31 after falling from a third-floor balcony in Buenos Aires on Wednesday. A post-mortem confirmed multiple traumas from the fall, with police describing Payne's hotel room as in complete disarray. Other musicians and fans have been remembering Liam's infectious energy with a candlelit visual held in Argentina. Now, back in the UK, a former police detective has been jailed for 19 years for stealing cocaine from work to sell on the streets of Manchester. The court heard that Andrew Talbot took almost 4 kilograms of cocaine with a retail value of £400,000 from an evidence store and then searched police systems for dealers to help him sell the drug. The 54-year-old, who worked for Greater Manchester Police's Serious Crime Division, was found guilty of misconduct in public office and supplying Class A drugs. A heavily pregnant woman and her unborn baby have died after a collision with an unmarked police car in south-east London. The incident happened at around 6:15 last night. Witnesses have told GB News that it appears the police vehicles were responding to an emergency at the time. 2 officers in the police car were taken to hospital but have since been discharged, and a road closure remains in place as inquiries continue. Alex Salmond's body has returned to Aberdeen from North Macedonia following his sudden death at a conference on Saturday. The former First Minister passed away from a heart attack in Ohrid, and his body was flown back this afternoon on a chartered flight arranged by businessman Sir Tom Hunter. Our GB News Scotland reporter Tony Maguire has more.
The body of former First Minister Alex Salmond was successfully returned home to Scotland today. Mr Salmond was attending the Academy of National Diplomacy conference in North Macedonia, where he suffered a major heart attack last weekend. After days of discussions between the UK and Scottish governments, it was Sir Tom Hunter, the Scottish businessman, who paid for a private charter to bring his body home. Before leaving North Macedonia, a guard of honour placed a saltire atop his coffin and he was slowly marched into the plane. A few hours later, he touched down here at Aberdeen Airport, where he was met by his wife Moira, members of the Salmond family and the Alba Party, including his deputy, Kenny McCaskill.
And King Charles and Queen Camilla have touched down in Australia for a historic royal tour. The couple landed in Sydney, greeted with a warm welcome and a bouquet of flowers for the Queen. Our royal correspondent Cameron Walker is on the ground in Sydney.
King and Queen have got a pretty packed schedule over the next 6 days in Australia, both in Sydney and in Canberra. Tomorrow, Saturday, is going to be a rest day for the King. Of course, he's travelled 24 hours to get here and he has cancer. He has paused his cancer treatment while he is here in Australia. But that will give him, it's hoped, enough energy to carry out his vast programme of engagement in New South Wales. But Republicans have been very vocal about the fact that the King is here. The first time ever that a reigning King has been on Australian soil. They are calling it the farewell tour of Oz. However, Australian monarchists are pointing out that there are thousands of people who are wanting to welcome King Charles and Queen Camilla here to Australia. But it is up to the Australian people to decide how well the King is received down under.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Michelle.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that. My name's Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company on this Friday evening right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel, I've got Matt Goodwin, the pollster and academic, and Judita De Silva, the broadcast journalist. Good evening to both of you. You're very welcome tonight. As are each and every single one of you at home as well. What's on your mind this evening? Lots, I suspect. I want to talk to you about the Tory leadership debate last night. Did you see it? Who do you think won? There was lots of themes that came out of that. Don't worry, we shall be exploring them. I also want to ask you a simple question, ladies and gents. Why on earth are so many migrants coming into this country without criminal record checks? What is going on? The Labour Party, do you not think they should have anything better to do with their time than get themselves organised to head off over to America to try and help the Democrats win the election? Apparently not, is the answer to that. Anyway, lots to discuss. Get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.com on the email. You can go to the website, gbnews.com/yoursay, or, of course, you can tweet or X me. But look, that first one then, it was the big night last night. Did you watch it? What did you think to it? It was Jenrick v Badenoch head-to-head. I've got to say, there was quite a lot of interesting themes that came out for me. The word drama, end the drama. I mean, if Robert Jenrick had, I don't know, a couple of bob every time he said drama, he'd have retired, I think, by now. I also thought it was very interesting, Kemi Badenoch saying, I'm not going to give you policies. This is not about policies. It's about trusting me. We need an engineer. I am your engineer. What did you think to it all?
Well, the first thing to say is this is a Conservative Party that's in the midst of a philosophical, an ideological, an electoral crisis. It's a party that doesn't quite know what it is anymore, where it's going, how it's going to reconnect with the country. You know, the interesting thing that struck me, Michelle, I think, was you heard a lot from Robert Jenrick about I'm going to leave the ECHR, I'm going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. And I was sort of sat there wondering, well, that's OK. A lot of people out there would agree with that. We can better control our borders. We can better deport foreign national offenders. But there's one thing standing in his way, which is the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Now, at some point between today and 2029, whoever wins this contest, Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick, they're going to have to wrestle with this Conservative Parliamentary Party, which is leaning much further to the left now, don't forget, on these cultural issues, than their average post-Brexit voters. So somewhere along the way, there's going to be this enormous battle for the soul of the Conservative Party with maybe Robert Jenrick, maybe Kemi Badenoch saying it's time to leave the ECHR or it's time to get tough on immigration. And a lot of those one nation, liberal, dare I say, wet Tories saying, hang on a minute, we're not up for this. And so I think the civil war within the Conservative Party actually hasn't even started.
Juditha?
I do agree that it's an ideological and identity crisis that they're wrestling with. And I do appreciate that Jenrick does recognise that I have to present myself as the kind of leader I will be. Then you have the consistency to know that if you get behind me, this is the direction I'm steering the ship. So I think it was ill-advised for Kemi Badenoch to be, just trust me, you'll find out who I am as a leader later on. It's ill-advised because that is an issue that has caused problems in the Conservative Party because what they think they invested in with one leader, they changed tack at a different point of view. They wanted to know that if I buy into you, I know what I'm getting. And that's why I think her play was ill-advised.
I've got to say, though, one of the things, just in case you didn't, I mean, if you didn't watch it last night, I don't even know what to say to you. What better things did you have to do last night than join that? I watched it all. I found it riveting. Look, just to give her credit, what she was trying to say, she wasn't just saying, I've got no policies because I've got no idea. She was saying, I've got policy ideas, but what I don't want to do is impose them onto everybody else. She was saying that she wants her way of working to be a very kind of collaborative, collective one.
No, but unfortunately, her reputation precedes her, and her nature as a politician is well known and well documented. And the fact of the dictation and the requisite of a leader is you do have to pull rank. No matter how collaborative you are in the decision-making process, the final buck stops with you and you make the decisions. So show them the kind of decision-maker you are now, because saying that I'm going to listen to everyone doesn't bode well when people think that I need a hardline leader that's going to steer us in a direction consistently, so we are the kind of opposition that can take on the Labour at the next election.
Can I just briefly come in here, because I think it's a really interesting point. You've got, on the one hand, two leaders who are saying, look, the principal threat to the survival of the Conservative Party is Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. And on that diagnosis, I think they're absolutely correct. 1 in 4 Conservative voters at the 24 general election went to Nigel Farage and Reform. Yes, some went to the Lib Dems and Labour, but actually, overall, there's no question Reform is the biggest threat to the Conservatives. So how do you win those people back? Well, you do lean into the immigration question, you lean into the ECHR, but you've also got to be authentic. I mean, voters out there aren't stupid. They've had 14 years of Conservative leaders, Conservative governments promising them, ever since David Cameron took over in 2005, that they were going to get lower migration, they were going to get a self-governing independent nation, they were going to get tough on crime, they were going to have strong borders, they were going to have, you know, institutions that respect and promote British history, identity and culture. And over the 14 years, they've been continuously let down. So I don't sense out there in the country yet a readiness to re-engage in a conversation with the Conservative Party. And I think that's principally going to be the biggest challenge facing either Robert Jenrick or Kemi Badenoch, which is how do you actually start a new conversation with the country, which has just turned off from this brand, which has become utterly toxic in the eyes of men.
That's why they polled that sentiment where they said there are a lot of Tories who feel come an election, neither one of these leaders can actually lead them to victory. And that's why they're kind of disenchanted with where they stand with the options they have. But even going back to that issue about reform, I find the whole question about the effect of Reform UK interesting, because one question I would really like to just pose to Nigel Farage is, what is his ultimate plan? Because if Reform UK is moving in a direction of becoming a viable political party, you don't exactly conduct yourself like a leader, you conduct yourself like a disruptor. If your intention is to be a political disruptor, then fair dues, you're doing a great job. But where do you want to take Reform, and does the rest of the party realise that that's your intention?
Why can't you have a
it?
disruptive leader? Because a lot of people would watch this and say, actually, Michelle, everything needs disrupting, quite frankly.
Trump's a disruptor, right? And he became president of the United States.
But then look at how problematic a leader you are. If you are disruptive, there's a kind of a coalescive element every leader has to have in order to move a country in a direction where you know you function in a global landscape. If your function is to rage against the machine, you're never going to be productive and consistent when it comes to steadying the ship as a leader and for your country, because other countries don't like somebody they can't rely on, they can't predict, they can't call, they don't know what you will be from moment to moment.
In fairness, though, it's not as if Reform are just, venting against the system without suggesting an alternative. If you look at, for example, what Robert Jenrick proposed last night, the GBNews debate with Kerry Badenoch, many of the things he was advocating, exiting the European Convention on Human Rights, revising our immigration policy so it's high skill, not low skill, dramatically cutting numbers, all of those policies were in the Reform Party's contract with voters at the general election. So were I Nigel Farage, I'd be saying, look, actually, you can already see the success of Reform. It's not only reflected in 4 million votes from 5 MPs in the House of Commons, it's actually reflected in the changing nature of the Conservative Party, which I suspect, and I've known Nigel Farage on and off for, 15 years. I suspect what he's thinking now is this is the first time that he has a genuine shot at actually replacing the Conservative Party.
Can I ask you a question then? Because there's been God knows how many council by-elections since the general election, and Reform UK haven't done very well at all. So if we're moving in this direction of travel, that Reform are getting all momentum and that everyone needs to be anxious about Reform, why haven't they been performing better in the council by-elections then? I
think it depends on what elections you're looking at. I mean, in the national polls, we had for the first time one pollster last week put Reform on 21%, Labour on 26%, Conservatives 26%. Local elections, very low turnout. You don't always know what's happening. I think the real test is going to be those first parliamentary by-elections that turn up and the local elections, of course, next spring. So it's going to be also one thing. The challenge for Reform, just to add to that...
A lot of people get annoyed with their local councillors. If you're a Reform supporter and you've got an opportunity to get one of your guys in at grassroots, at one of your people that you're supporting, why aren't people taking up the opportunity then? I think it's been 90-odd council by-elections since the last general election. I think Reform have got 2 seats there.
I think that's one of the challenges. I remember in Birmingham at the...
They got one in Blackpool.
At the Reform Conference, when we had the show at the Reform Conference, they were all saying at that point they're going to emulate the Liberal Democrat strategy of going local and active and intensive. They're going to have to deliver on that if they're going to become a big governing party.
What do you think to it all, by the way? Do you think this Reform threat is overhyped or not? Don't shout at your screen saying, Michelle, they've not fielded candidates in all of those council by-elections. I know that. I'm just asking, as a direction to travel, why haven't they seen much more success? What did you think then to that leadership debate last night? The conversation will continue also. Christopher Chirk, the MP, he's apparently been suggesting that if you're a woman with young children, the leader of the opposition role is perhaps not for you because you've got your hands full with your kids. What do you think to that? Stephen?
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
My kingdom for a voice. Scientists have... I can't believe this story. Scientists have incredibly recreated the voice of Richard III using both his skull shape and a knowledge of medieval speech patterns. Me neither. The result is that the king, who was famously killed at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, would have spoken in English close to that of a man from modern-day Yorkshire or Somerset. Let's take a listen.
The sun shines with no less licht and splendour, nor does it suffer any diminution of its strength.
Let's discuss this further with Yvonne Morley-Chisholm, the voice coach behind the project, who spent 10 years researching how the monarch would have sounded. Yvonne, you can probably see from my face, I have no idea how this works. Can you enlighten me as to what all this is about?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Dawn. So yes, I had a mad idea 10 years ago. I normally work with actors where we have a recording of a historical person, and we do something called vocal profiling to train the actor who's going to be performing on stage or screen to move their tongue tip, their jaw, their lips, everything, and get behind the personality of who they're playing. We obviously have quite a lot of that missing from Richard. We don't have a recording of him, but I wondered how far we could go. And a key player in this has been and is Professor Caroline Wilkinson, who over a decade ago created his face, first of all, from his skull. Now, on the day we, as Shakespeare would say, shuffle off our mortal coil, every little dent and dimple in the bones says how fit and strong the muscles were. So I thought, OK, we know what his face could do.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I am Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. I'll tell you what we were just laughing at in a couple of minutes when we come on to the story. You might have had the same blonde moment that I had earlier on, but look, Matt Goodwin and Judita De Silva remain alongside us. Look, Gina, one of my viewers, you've been in touch and said, I would have said Kemi won the debate, but she let the cat out of the bag last night regarding leaving the ECHR. She reckons it would divide the party, showing that nothing has changed. She says she thinks that she's doing whatever Michael Gove tells her to. And Jenrick, she said, came across as a Liberal. Well, Gina, just for you, then let's look at that clip of Kemi Badenoch talking about ECHR dividing. Listen.
I think that the ECHR argument is not the right one. I think that is the biggest weakness. I think it will divide our party. It will mean that the infighting and squabbling will continue. If we want to end the drama, we need to do this the right way. Let's come to a consensus. And maybe that is leaving the ECHR, but it is not about imposing your views on everybody else.
Got a big round of applause, that. Do you agree?
I think that raises some questions, actually, around Kemi Badenoch's leadership, because it sounds as though she's putting the Conservative Party ahead of the country. If we want to secure our borders, if we want to be able to deport foreign national criminals, if we want to be able to be a self-governing independent nation, my view, and the view of many people, is that we have to exit the European Convention on Human Rights and we have to reform the Human Rights Act, which was created under Tony Blair. The fact that she's starting from the point of how she can maintain unity within the Conservative Parliamentary Party rather than what is in the best interests of the country and make that argument as a leader, that raises some big alarm bells, rings some big alarm bells for me.
I do think that whenever they bring up the ECHR argument, which is a point I think she did raise, and it's getting to, is the broader ramifications of it. And she mentioned the Good Friday Agreement and Northern Ireland, because when the discussion comes up, it seems like there's a complete disregard of the domino effect on Northern Ireland, which is very disheartening because there have been studies and there have been letters put out saying that this will trigger a whole series of the reassessments of what is contained within that agreement.
Well, it's just in case you're not familiar, it's written into the Good Friday Agreement, basically, that people will abide by the rules of the ECHR.
But also continuing, it's like also she drew a link to the exiting the EU and Brexit. What you have to understand is that the UK, like I said before, is a geographically small island. The might of the UK, the power, the influence of the UK is based on connections and associations and affiliations and partnerships. Once you continue to isolate yourself from the European bloc, it has a perception that is sent out like a bat signal to the rest of the world, whether it's America, whether it's the Far East, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Africa, because there is a consideration, a political power consideration that people have always historically had for the UK, because they've always seen that what the UK does, Europe follows. If we can get the UK on side, they can help us sway the rest of Europe. That's always the international perception of the power of the UK. Isolating it is going to be a very costly move for the country.
So leaving the ECHR is not isolating the UK.
No, it's a further move to saying that you're departing from a unified form of cooperation with the rest of Europe.
Leaving the ECHR is not about signalling that we are isolating. It is about signalling that we're putting the safety and the security of British people and their children ahead of supranational institutions, bodies, courts and judges that ultimately put international conventions ahead of the British people. That is ultimately what this is about.
So why is anyone else leaving it then? All these other countries are having all these same issues with all of these people essentially flooding their shores. Why aren't they queuing up front of the block to leave?
Europe is in the midst of an enormous political revolution around migration laws. Germany, the Dutch, the Italians, they're all now revising their approach to migration. Schengen, free movement within the European Union is essentially dead. Borders have gone back up. And in terms of other countries, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, they're not abiding by things like the ECHR. We could quite plausibly exit the ECHR, replace our human rights legislation with something like a Great Reform Bill, a British Bill of Rights, that would also secure things like the Good Friday Agreement.
How long would that take?
A couple of years. But Michelle, the point is, you know, I wrote a piece last week on the 10 reasons why we should leave the ECHR, and each of those 10 reasons wasn't a legal argument. It was about individual people who have come into the country, take an Albanian burglar as an example, came in, was given a 2.5-year sentence. He only served 6 months. We deported him back to Albania. He snuck his way back into the UK, and then we couldn't deport him because he used the ECHR to claim that it would violate his mental health and the rights of his family. This is insane.
But the point you just made, because one thing is that when you present the argument, presenting the ECHR as something that functions to the detriment of Britain's autonomy is not what it is. It's
to the detriment of British people.
It wasn't designed to do so. And then the further point that you did make is there is a recalibration happening across Europe when it comes to their policies towards migration. There is a collective shift that can happen where you reassess how the ECHR works for everyone. That is why I'm saying that UK operating to excise itself from it further moves towards sending out a message that we are separating ourselves from a collaborative recognition of things that the whole bloc
sake, applying that logic, when we exited ourselves from the EU COVID vaccine scheme, were we sending out a message that we were isolating, or were we instead sending out a message that we're more innovative, we're more productive, we're quicker, we're more flexible than the EU?
Very good point.
No, that was sending out, I would say, both messages. Because I'm telling you, like, internationally, there is a new understanding of where Britain stands in the whole global landscape, politically and also with influence.
Yes, but Judith,
and it is less
home will be listening to the example that he's just given, and then listening to you talking about, yes, but what about how the international community perceives us? They'll be sitting there going, hang on a second, all these wrong-uns are allowed to roam free around these isles.
That has to be addressed. 100% that has to be addressed. And that's why I agree with the points you make, that it is happening across a lot of countries, that it is a collective problem.
We're not in the European Union anymore.
But how you approach
it doesn't need to be a collective problem.
To fix, even Kemi Badenoch made the points that the EU is not to blame for problems existing within Britain, that you can autonomously deal with the problems happening within the country without feeling that you have to take actions to the detriment of your association to the rest of Europe.
Well, look, let's look at some of these cases then. We're talking about crime and migrants and all the rest of it in the ECHR, and is that the answer or not? Let's look at that after the break. And also, Labour Party, if they've got now better to do with their time, then send a cohort of people over to America to try and influence the outcome of the election there. Apparently not is the answer to that. I'll see you in 2.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. As one low clears away this weekend, another deeper low turns up by Sunday. So brighter for a time before more wet and windy weather arrives, courtesy of Storm Ashley, which during Friday and early Saturday is a relatively shallow low, but it deepens quickly later Saturday and then moves into the UK during Sunday. Ahead of that, another low is bringing spells of wet and windy weather to western parts of the UK this evening, and overnight the first area of rain clears eastwards with clearer skies following for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and temperatures dipping into the mid to low single figures in shelter spots, but a mild start to the day for much of England and Wales because of the cloud and outbreaks of rain that we'll face first thing. So for the Midlands, South East and East England, spells of heavy rain. Wales and the South West, as well as North West England, brighter skies, having seen the rain clear earlier on. Northern Ireland and Scotland back to sunny spells and showers. Quite a gusty breeze in the far northwest, but not quite as windy as Friday. Those showers, though, will be scattered, and in between there'll be some spells of sunshine for northern and western parts of the UK. So all in all, for many places, it's a reasonable spell of weather in between the two lows, but we do hold on to the rain for quite a while through the afternoon for eastern parts of England, and that will suppress temperatures here, 14 or 15 Celsius, elsewhere 17 or perhaps 18. By Sunday, though, Storm Ashley is moving in, and a swathe of wet and windy weather crosses the country, with the strongest winds arriving in the northwest later in the day. Really late afternoon and into the evening, we're likely to see wind gusts of 70 or 80 miles an hour for western Scotland, hence the amber warning. Could be some serious impacts from that and some coastal flooding.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long queues on the M1 on free stretches. First of all, up in South Yorkshire, one lane's been closed southbound from junction 36 to 35, heading away from Barnsley towards Rotherham at the scene of an accident. Further south, the inside lane shut northbound at junction 24, the East Midlands Airport turn-off where a car's broken down. And further south on the northbound carriageway, the inside lane's blocked off from junction 12 to 13 towards Bedford, following a breakdown. In Northamptonshire, a serious accident east of Northampton has closed the A45 between the Great Billing interchange and the Earls Barton turn-off. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, the exit slip road is partly blocked clockwise. Junction 11, the Chertsey exit, where a van has broken down. And on the M2 in Kent, the eastbound exit is closed to junction 7 at Brenley Corner for recovery work. Queues start before Faversham. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry. This is Dewbs Co, and look, time flies. It is already 6:30 on this Friday night. Lots to talk about with you. Nearly 400,000 legal migrants came to Britain since 2021 without criminal record checks. What on earth is going on, ladies and gents? Also, do you reckon new drivers should have more restrictions, i.e. should they be allowed to carry passengers or not? And the Labour Party have been accused of illegal activity and interfering in US elections. I'll tell you what they're up to a little bit later on. But look, for now, apparently, get this. This is according to research for the Centre from Migration Control. Apparently, almost 400,000 legal migrants came to Britain since 2021 without criminal record checks. Look, let's just get straight into the nuts and bolts of this. What do you make to this? What's going on?
This doesn't surprise me at all, because what happens now is the state and politicians, the government, they blame voters for misinformation or disinformation while concealing information and data from them. It's not only that we're not doing the criminal checks, it's that we're not collecting arrest rates and imprisonment rates by nationality and immigration status. Hang on, welfare credits. Welfare claims, tax credits, housing costs, accommodation costs, etc., etc. Government departments either have the data and they're not revealing it, or they're not collecting it in the first place at exactly the same time, Michelle, as other governments across Europe are collecting and releasing the data. Now, the question is why? Well, either it's incompetence or the state is deliberately concealing data from other people. And the criminality point, Lassie, is really key. I'll give you one example today. This is insane. This is crazy. A guy came over to the UK from Iraq, a goat herder, an illiterate goat herder, OK? And he came over and he joined an organised crime gang, and they sent him to Aberystwyth in Wales, and he flooded Aberystwyth with his gang full of cocaine and heroin. And he got the locals addicted to drugs, and then they funneled the money through fraudulent businesses on the high street, car washes, you know, no doubt those little sweet shops and taxi companies. Now, he's just been sent to prison, this Iraqi goat herder, for 3 years. Right? Now, why is this guy even in the country to begin with? If you break our laws, you should be deported. But what struck me is, you know, that there's a lady today as well who's put into prison for 2.5 years for writing some offensive things on Facebook. So why does this guy who comes over from Iraq, he gets 6 months more in prison? Why is he even in the country to begin with? This is lunacy. We need to leave the ECHR, control our borders, and start treating British people with respect and decency, including giving them the data that they need to make an informed judgment about whether immigration's good or bad for the country.
I do agree that when it comes to the immigration policy, it is broken in so many different dimensions, but that has to be addressed. But the key thing is the immigration problem will not be solved without international collaboration. Britain cannot do it on its own because things like criminal record screening and tax evasion and things like all those things that can fall within the cracks will only happen when you're able to process people with the collaboration of the country where they've come from and the countries they've come through. So the kinds of things that people talk about as solutions are so, and again, I bring up that word about isolating of Britain, because you cannot fix a problem which originates from international borders without the help of those countries who have actually, without the help of the countries where those people came from and came through.
I think you're giving the British state a free pass. You know, one of the most shocking examples was the guy that came over from Serbia. Actually, originally, he was a shepherd. He was a shepherd from Afghanistan. And he came over into the UK. He told British authorities he was 14 years of age. So without checking, they put him in secondary school, a secondary school down in Bournemouth, next to Year 9 pupils. He was 19 and he'd already killed 2 guys in Serbia, and he went on to murder a 21-year-old British guy called Thomas Roberts. The British state is just utterly incompetent when it comes to managing immigration and the security of British people. I think they've had enough.
I know, right? Let me tell you now, even when you... I know that story you was referring to, but even when you're just repeating that about that guy being put in with the kids, it really enrages me. If I was one of the mothers of the pupils in that class, I would be looking to see if I could take legal action, whether it was the school or the council or whoever it was that had put a grown man in amongst my child, a murderer, by the way, in amongst my child. I'd be looking to see whether or not I could create some kind of legal action, because surely they've put my child in danger. But the flip side of this is, the second people start having conversations about, right, all these people coming over reckoning that they're kids, when, let's be honest, if your eyes work, a lot of the times you can see that they're a lot older than they say they are. But what the do-gooders will say is, hang on a second, people age differently, you know, these people might look like children. But the second anyone starts suggesting doing medical age checks, then this is when people get upset and say it's a breach of their human rights, whether it's, I don't know, mandating, say, like dental checks or something like that. So where do you go with this?
Actually, in this particular case, in fact, it's just so sad what happened with this case with the 21-year-old lad, Thomas Roberts. I'm absolutely outraged. But in that case, the dentist even said to authorities, this guy is not 14.
The one that flagged it.
This guy is 19.
Yes.
And even then, they didn't do anything. And after this guy murdered Thomas Roberts, this guy from Afghanistan, the coroner said that there was no case for an inquest because there had not been systemic failures in the treatment of this guy. It's absolutely outrageous.
You are completely right that is down to incompetence in a system that is not functioning properly. But then you can't throw that wider to say that, oh, your inability to function autonomously to govern the country, that's to deal with an internal broken system, which both of the leaders have said is an issue. So until you start addressing the actual things internally that are wrong, only then will you truly know how much of an influence international issues have on Britain.
Yeah, but look, OK, we need to fix the problem. People say, how do you fix it? It's very clear. Leave the ECHR, reform the Human Rights Act, have an active deterrent. Those 3 things will immediately help us control our borders and keep British people safe. Now, left and right, they don't want to do that. The only people who are saying they do want to do that currently are the Reform Party.
What I've said before is that even if you do that, people will not stop coming. When you look at the stories that you cover on GB News about the kinds of people who are willing to die risking to come, I keep saying they will not stop coming. That is why the key thing is
that's incorrect.
What you have
incorrect.
While you are dealing with the issue on this end, you also have to deal with the issue of what motivates them to take the journey in the first place. That is what Keir Starmer said in the beginning, and I don't know how far they're actually going to push this policy is. You have to collaborate with people at the source countries to know what is motivating them to actually emigrate in the first place.
So if you think that David Lammy, which is what he's done, if you think giving Tin Pot dictatorships in Africa and the Middle East £100 million of taxpayers' money, which is what he's done,
that's not what I agree
86 million. OK, but that's one thing that Labour are doing to try and tackle migration upstream rather than control our borders. That ain't going to make a difference. Look, at the end of the day, as the Dutch have said this week, they want a Rwanda-style agreement with Uganda. Italy, Meloni has said she wants offshore processing. Germany has said the same. Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, has said that she's now looking at return hubs and offshore processing. The only people who are not looking at this, Keir Starmer and the Labour government, what they've done instead, remarkably, they've given 63,000 illegal migrants and asylum seekers the right to stay in the UK permanently. They've just said, you can just stay. Now, what kind of signal is that going to send to people in Syria and Afghanistan, in Iraq? If you enter Britain illegally, you can stay. It's absolutely bonkers.
I do agree with that, but I do say, like what Ursula von der Leyen said, offshore processing is fundamental because the point where you start vetting people should be much sooner much sooner than them getting to a Britain or getting to a France or getting to an Italy. But that will only happen when you start investing in originating countries, knowing that by the time you want to even make the journey, this is the first port of call, and that's where you begin processing. That's where money should be invested. Where David Lammy is investing money, I don't agree with that, because I don't think they have a myopia when it comes to looking at the problem at the source, because they don't have a full understanding of what it is that motivates migrants to make that journey.
I don't think this government has an understanding of anything, to be honest. It's one of the worst governments in my lifetime. I can't remember a government that has started this badly. And it just seems to be doing the opposite of what you should be doing in order to fix this problem.
But I mean, I don't mean to be funny, but aren't we just massively overcomplicating this? You're talking about there has to be this full-on strategy to look at the source countries and what's motivating people to... People just need to spend about 5 minutes on TikTok and then they'll see exactly what's motivating a lot of these young men to leave their source countries, as we call it. And that is the videos that go around of lots of... It'll be their mates, a lot of young men from their own source countries in 4-star hotels, riding around on bikes, working in the black economy for companies, I won't mention the companies, but I think you know what I mean, takeaway delivery companies, earning cash in hand and so on and so forth, then eventually getting social housing. That's
but you see, you've just pointed out parts of where the fractures lie, which do have to be remedied. People who exploit for free labour, people who do actually take advantage of people who are undocumented that they know are illegal. Those are all things that the country is fully aware happens. They know the key industries that exploit it the most, but you're not focusing your remedies in that direction. That is how you begin to fix the problem on this end. But as I said, there is also an entire swathe of immigrants, for instance, who have made the journey to the West and have had a horrible time and want to go back. That's a whole body of people that you could use to change the conversation on migration, because believe you me, if you have immigrants at source countries talking to their own people who said, I made the journey and I came back because this is how awful it is, you begin to change the tide of flow of people.
There was another person who came to the UK recently who I met for coffee, I won't name. He came from United Arab Emirates, and he just said, what's happening to your country? You don't put the security of your own people first. This would never happen in places like where he was from. And it's a very interesting observation, because we sort of, we fall into the trap of thinking this is normal, having, non-existent borders and distributing people into our communities. And a lot of other countries think it's completely insane. We should not be allowing people who have entered Britain illegally to simply, filter into our communities. They should be sent to an offshore processing centre immediately and have their claims processed there. The Rwanda programme was not perfect. It had holes in it. It needed to be fixed. But it was I would argue, it was beginning to make a difference when you saw would-be illegal migrants in Ireland saying the reason they were in Ireland was because they were scared of being sent to an offshore processing centre. That's what we call a deterrent, which is
right.
why the Dutch and the Germans and the Italians and Ursula von der Leyen, among other people, are now saying if Europe is going to fix this issue, it can't just send hundreds of billions of euros to African countries, most of which goes to corrupt leaders. It actually has to start dealing with offshore processing.
Paul, one of my viewers, says, Michelle, it feels to me like too many British politicians care more about what the international community think than they care about looking after the British people in here. He says prime ministers in particular seem to worry more about their post-premiership millions on their lecture tours. Is that harsh or fair? You get in touch and tell me, look, lots to talk about after the break. The Labour Party, really? Should they be heading off to the US to interfere with the election outcome there? Have they got nothing better to do? Also, Christopher Chirp reckons that women with young kids don't really have any business in high-powered, demanding jobs like leader of the opposition. Is he right or wrong? See you in 2.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Young adults spend a few years living away from home at university, those who go to university, but many then have no choice but to move back in with their parents because of the rising cost of renting.
But is this an excuse, and are Gen Z or Z just being lazy?
No, I mean, what do you make of it, Debbie? Because we do have to have some sympathy, don't we, in that, you know, rents are very high, it's very hard to get a mortgage. There are issues there.
I think the push towards young people to go to university as well is not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people. And I think people should start work early. These guys leave their universities with a huge amount of debt, no jobs, or huge rent. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So I think we've got to look at the work ethic and start it younger. Because I think it's so easy just to move back with your mum and dad, isn't it?
To speak like a Gen Zer, they would say that, well, it's OK for your generation, you had it easy.
Realistically, that isn't quite that true, because a lot of people then didn't go to university. This is a relatively new thing that everybody goes to university.
I have to say, what strikes me today is that you still have, amongst all these problems, not having enough money, going to university when perhaps you shouldn't be, all these sort of issues, you still get all these people saying, well, I'm going to have a year out.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think the thing is, they say, oh, it was easy for you, but it wasn't really. We still had to rent places.
But the thing is with this debate, Debbie, is the generation we're talking about, Gen Z, who we're accusing of being lazy, have been raised by our generation.
Yeah.
So what have we done wrong that, if they are lazier, has made them like that?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, Dewbs Co. With me, Michelle, Dewberry, Matt Goodwin and Jadita De Silva. It's Friday, Dewberry Tavern is open. It's my favourite part of the week, quite frankly. So cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Everyone.
Cheers,
everyone. And cheers to you guys at home. Now, there you go. That's how you know the weekend started, doesn't it? Obviously, I don't encourage binge drinking or anything like that. Drink responsibly, ladies and gents. Look, the Labour Party... Do you think that they might have their hands full at this moment in time? Because I would imagine that the answer to that is yes. However, they do seem to have found enough time to actually advertise for groups of people to join them on some kind of trip over to the US. They're looking for around 100 Labour Party staff members. This is all about trying to help get Kamala Harris into office. What do you think to this, Matt Goodwin?
Do you know, I was thinking this week, you've got a Labour government that's giving away territory to our enemies, indulging in talk about paying reparations for what happened during the days of the British Empire, playing identity politics with Rachel Reeves saying the only significant thing is that she's the first female chancellor, or David Lammy going to the UN and saying, you know, he's a black guy and that's a significant thing about him giving the speech, etc. Public sector pay rises, the hypocrisy of Freebiegate, and it struck me, we don't actually have a government. We've got student union politics. It reminds me of student union politics, sending your activists and your party to campaign for the Kamala Harris and the Democrats. Imagine if the Conservatives sent their activists and aides to campaign for Donald Trump. Imagine the moral meltdown among much of the media class and the commentariat if Conservatives campaign for Donald Trump. It's absolutely bananas.
Earlier, you had a Labour spokesperson who laid out that it is common practice. What I feel is that this is a particularly contentious election where it probably would be best to just be hands-off. That is what the problem is, because the actual practice itself is pretty commonplace. But because it is this election between these two candidates that people have a particular problem. We've seen Liz Truss and we've seen Nigel Farage go to America for Republican conventions, and it is what it is. But there's always been an affiliation between Labour and the Democrats, Republicans and the Tories. Historically, there has been. But what it is now is that because this is so contentious, Labour would fare better if they were just hands-off. But to actually say that there is something wrong with what they've done doesn't carry hold.
It makes complete sense, Labour forging an alliance with Kamala Harris, because let's be frank, they are both indulging in identity politics and platitudes while not really doing anything to solve the underlying issues.
Look, let me just get this post up, shall I, on the screen. I've got to say, everyone, this was the post that they put out. It's had a little bit of a backlash. I'll put that mildly. So they have then deleted that. So look, let me just see if I can get that post up for you. There was a couple of them, actually. I've got nearly 100 Labour Party staff, current and former, going to the US in the next few weeks, heading to North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania and Virginia. I've got 10 spots available for anyone to head to the battleground state of North Carolina. We will sort your housing. Email me on, and it says the email address, if you're interested. Thanks. I mean, I dread to think, ladies and gents, dread to think who's paying for that. I mean, we have reached out for them, and apparently they're having to pay it for themselves. I mean, I'll leave that up to your imagination. What you think of that?
Do you know why they're going there? Do you know why they're going to the swing states? Because all the polling currently shows that actually Harris is now trailing Trump in the swing states. So a lot of people on the left are getting very, very nervous about this election because, you know...
It could go, as it stands now, it could go either way. When you see that there was a record turnout in Georgia for early voters, that says one thing. So it's nature of American politics at this stage to be pretty much pendulum swinging.
I think Trump, watch his space. I think Trump's going to win.
Do you? Well, there you go. We will be watching it space. We haven't got that long to go, actually. It's flown by, hasn't it? So you mentioned student union politics. I thought of that when the Transport Minister was telling people to boycott P&O and then actually having to deal in the capacity as the Transport Minister days later. It's a little bit cringe, isn't it? Anyway, you'll have your strong opinions on that. Look, Christopher Hope, he is an MP. Look, we've all, Christopher Chope. Well done. I've got our Chopper on my brain.
I know, I didn't want Chopper getting into trouble.
Yeah, we don't want Christopher Hope getting landed with this one, because Christopher Chope, the Dorset MP, or an MP in Dorset, listen to what he had to say. He's come under a little bit of hot water. Listen.
Being leader of the opposition is a really demanding job, and much as I like Kemi, I think she's preoccupied with her own children, quite understandably. But I think Robert's children are a bit older, and I think that it's important that whoever leads the opposition has got an immense amount of time and energy.
Short story, he's had a massive backlash against that. Juditha, what do you think?
I think the articulation was horrendous, and just looking at the optics of who he is and what he's saying, it just landed like a lead balloon. On the basis, like, a woman who's a mother can hold any position she chooses as long as you figure out the logistics of everything that goes into your life. But there's a fundamental point, that a small point that I agree with. And if you're the child of a working mother, you are a working mother yourself, there are certain jobs that are so demanding, at some point in life you will have to make sacrifices. And you do have those conversations in the fullness of time with your children.
And is leader of the opposition one of those jobs?
It is one of those jobs, because it is time-consuming, it's labour-intensive, and it is going to be a point where, but then it's down to the dynamic of her family. If you've got a situation where your husband will take on the lion's share when he needs to, you'll be fine.
Yeah, but
and only she knows the dynamic that lies in her family.
The point about this comment, which is why it's irritated so many people, including myself, is he wouldn't have said it about a male prime minister. And you think about, you know, let's go Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, they all had young children when they were in number 10 Downing Street in office, juggling, you know, in some cases, for example, David Cameron, I think I'm right in saying, had a disabled child as well when he was in office. And, you know, the things that people go through, but yet were still able to do the job. And there are lots of women out there, professional women, making enormous sacrifices with high-powered jobs in many cases, juggling families. I just think, you know, for a Conservative Party that's trying to move on after an election defeat...
You just said the key words, they make sacrifices, and we know that. And that's why I say that's what the conversation should be about, and that's how you make progress, when you begin to understand the full scope of what women have to do, because every point you made shows that in those cases, there's always a sense, always a perception the woman is the caregiver, the mother takes the lion's share of parenting when it comes to domestic duties and looking after, like, the pastoral care.
I just kind of,
So when he will say that, he would never say that to a man, because there's a perception that the mother is primary in the home. That is the conversation that needs to be had, is that the amount of pressure put on women is exponentially more than men. So when you have a woman going for a job like this, it's applaudable on that level, because she's still juggling all of those things that historically women have to do. But you're beginning to change the discussion on the kind of parity that exists when it comes to men being more domesticated when it comes to looking after children.
Yeah, I mean, I feel quite strongly about this issue. I mean, you know, I watched my mother battle for many years, you know, single mother, big job, 2 boys, you know, and it just grates me when an older generation of Conservatives say things that they wouldn't say about men, and I don't think it's fair on women.
But then we also do have to be realistic, everybody, because there are only 24 hours in a day, and us women, we do, particularly us of a certain age, we get pumped with this message that you can have it all, you can have it all. Like I said, 24 hours in a day. So we do have to learn to prioritise, and something somewhere's got to give. So people have to decide in their own wells what that is that gives. Look, lots of people divided on that one. Lots of people saying to me, you at home, saying the woman's place, the mother's place is at home with their kids. What is wrong with that, you're asking? I'll leave it to you to fight out. Look, that's all I've got time for. Thank you, guys. Thank you to each and every one of you at home for spending that hour with me. Have a good weekend. Night-night.
We'll see a cold snap. Ooh.